Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in this one what I'm going to do is show you how I set up weapons, which I've been doing on live streams if you've been catching them. So it's to do with a line trace and it allows you to hit skeletal meshes much easier than what the projectile does. So this one is pretty much pointless when using VR because it doesn't register hits correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up, or actually we're going to delete this. And then we're going to set up these weapons so we can have a reusable component rather than having it all in one blueprint, which just makes it a little bit easier. And then we can fire it and attack, or at least damage a skeletal mesh, which is going to be a player, which we'll import in. Just before I get started, I want to say a big thank you to all the Patreons for making this possible. If you do want access to videos early now, we're doing them over on the Patreon. So through the mid-tier, you can actually access videos a week early. And hopefully we'll do that throughout these tutorials. So just for now, let's jump right in. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our weapon. So our pistol, and we're actually going to delete almost all of this. So we're going to delete this lot. We want to keep our muzzle location because we're going to use that to determine where our line trace starts. And our haptic feedback, we're going to keep this, but we're going to turn it into a little custom. Actually, we can do a function for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to select everything in our play haptic and then collapse to function. Call this haptic feedback. Now what we can do is we can actually reuse this wherever we want inside of this blueprint. So if we enable it, or we double click, all we've got is play haptic feedback. That's pretty much it. So we've got that one. We'll keep that to the side. And what we want to do now is actually set up our components. So we could build onto this blueprint and have it in here. But the way I like to do it is actually setting up a separate scene component, which we can drag and drop on. Because what that allows us to do is we could have a component for a single shot. We could have a component for a dual shot, so like fire 3 bullets at a time, or we can even set it up so we've got a shotgun component, so you can just quickly drag and drop it onto different things. So before we go, I want you to notice that this muzzle location is actually a scene component up here in the top left. So if we hover over it, it says scene component. This is important because our component is going to have to read this information. So what that means is we're going to move this, going to go to our content browser, and in here, we're going to right click blueprint class, and we want a scene component. So it says a scene component is a component that has a scene transform and can be attached to other scene components. That's pretty much what we're after. We could use an actor component, but we kind of want to move the position of it, or you might do anyway. We're not going to in this one. So scene component, let's call this single shot. And I'm just going to do an SC just for scene component. So scene component, single shot. We can select this. And in here, what we want to do is we want to right click and we're going to create a custom event and we're going to call this fire, if I can rename it properly. Let's call this, delete these ones because we don't need them. And the first thing we're going to do is actually set up a input. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an input in here for a scene component, which is going to be our muzzle location. So basically we just want to plug this in. So back in our SA_single shot, we're going to do inputs. Set the type to scene component, find the actual one, but we don't. We're just using it for a location. So we've got scene component object reference. I'm gonna call this muzzle location, just so we know what it is. And we're gonna set that. So we're gonna right click, promote to variable, and now we have a reference to that muzzle location. So what we can do now, just so it's easier so you can kind of keep track of it, if we compile and we go back to our pistol, we can then go to add component in the top left and search single shot. And you see we've got that SC single shot. So basically this is a reusable piece of code that we can drag and drop and add to different things. So if we drag this into the scene now, we get a reference to it, and then we can drag off and search fire. And you'll see that we can actually call that function that we just created with our muzzle location. So that's all we need to set up and activate that event. So now we can have this actually send information to our scene component, have it do something, and then go back. And it just keeps the entire blueprint for the weapons super clean. Because now all you have to do is change that one node. If you create multiple different fire types, and you can just have the outputs come through if you do need to access them in the weapon. And then once we press play, or once we fire it, it's going to play the haptic feedback. So that's literally all we have to do in here. For now, what we can do is we can hit compile, save, and then we'll go back to the SC_single shot. And what we need to do now is set up our location or a line trace from this location. So we're going to drag in another reference to our get muzzle location. So we've got it. And we want to do a sphere trace by channel. So sphere trace by channel. And what this is essentially, it allows us to create an invisible line from our gun barrel to whatever we want to hit for as far as we want to hit. So we can control that. And the reason we're using a sphere trace is because it allows us to increase the width of the line. So we can have a thick line. So in VR, it's more difficult to actually aim and hit something with a very small point. So by extending this, you can have it so it's a bit easier to hit things from a distance, and it just feels a lot nicer as well. Plus the hit detection is actually a bit more accurate. So we're going to connect that to our muzzle location, and then we want to get from our muzzle location, we want to get world location, and then get world rotation. From our world rotation, we want to get forward vector. So get forward vector. And what this is doing is it's essentially taking our muzzle's location, if we tidy this up. So we get our rotation, which is wherever we're pointing the gun, and it'll look for the forward vector from it. So in this case, if we go to the weapons viewport, it will be our muzzle location, and it will be literally our red arrow here. So it'll point forward from it, and it just allows us to get more accuracy from that. So back to our single shot, make some space, and we want to plug our world location into our start. So basically we're getting the muzzle location. Whereabouts is in the world is that. We're just going to make this sphere trace start exactly there, which is what we want. But we want to multiply our world location by our forward vector so we can get, and now what we need to do is just set our end. And to do that, we want to get our start location, and we want to figure out where the end of that line is going to be in relative space. And to do that, we can literally just do a add. So we're doing an add float. We're going to do an add vector. And before we connect the forward vector to this one, what we need to do is actually add to it. So the reason for that is we get our world location and we get our world forward vector. They're technically in the exact same spot. So even though they're basically on top of each other right now. So what we're going to do is we want to add float. So we're just going to add a single value to how far we want to be able to fire. So just as a bit of, actually, yeah, just to make it good practice, we're going to plug this float value into our fire, and then we'll rename this to, in most cases, you don't need to do that. You could just have a set value. But the reason I'm doing this is because all weapons might have a different value for how far they can fire. I'm not really too sure how you're going to set it up, but it'll just be extendable. And then we plug our plus. So before we actually plug in our get forward to our plus from world location, we want to multiply the distance. So at the minute, if we plug both of these into each other, for example, they would technically be on top of each other. They wouldn't have any, there wouldn't technically be any distance to it. So the start and the end would be in the exact same place. So what we want to do is take the return value. We're going to multiply by a float. So it's exponential essentially. And then we can plug this into the plus and the plus into our end. And now we've got a distance, but we haven't set a value. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plug this value directly into our fire event, so we can control it from the weapon itself. It just makes it a little bit easier, and it means if you've got weapons that have different distances, you can control it a little bit easier as well. So I'm just going to literally drag the green pin to our custom event, and you'll see it adds a input. And from here, I'm just going to call this fire distance and hit enter. And now we've actually got the information we need to fire the weapon. So if we hit compile and we go back to our pistol, I want to go to the event graph, and then we definitely need to set a fire distance. So I'm just going to set here, and I'm going to set it to 2000. And if we make sure inside of our single shot line trace, our draw debug type is set to, we'll do 1 frame. That should be enough. And we also need to change our radius. I forgot to say that. So this is how wide our line trace will be. 2 or 3 is normally all right. So I'm going to do 3, hit compile. And then if we jump right in, what we should be able to do is actually go up to our weapon, pick it up, and then we can fire it with a trigger. So you can see we've got our actual weapon, and we can see that line trace being fired when we press the trigger, which is exactly what we're after. Now what we want to do is actually get our information from our sphere trace. So at the minute, it doesn't actually know what it's hitting. And we can use the out hit to do that. You could right click and then split struck pin, but it just makes it a little bit of a mess. So what we're going to do is we're going to Control Z. So what we're going to do is we're going to recombine those, and we're going to drag off our hit, and we're going to do break result instead. So we do break result, and we'll open this up. And in this case, we're not too worried about if we're hitting walls or inanimate objects. We kind of just want an actor. We know our enemy AI will be an actor. Our items are actors. So what we can do is we can do from hit actor, we can do is valid with the question mark. And the reason we do this is we're essentially doing a check to say, okay, have we hit something? If yes, we're going to then add some impulse to that location. And we're going to do this by using the component. So every actor has a component in it. So from hit component, we want to drag off and we do add impulse. And we want add radial impulse, essentially a sphere that'll grow. So we're going to plug this into is valid. And for our origin, we could set up a load of math to do that, but we don't need to. We literally have impact point. So where does our line trace hit? That's the exact location we want to set our impulse. And now for radius, we just want to set this to something small, like 50. If the strength, I find about 3000 actually works quite well. So now if we take a look at this, we can hit compile and save. And if we jump in again, we can pick up our weapon. And then if we shoot something, we can see it actually influences the objects that we shoot, which is exactly what we want to make it look like we've hit something. So now the question is, how do we make this line trace damage an AI or a player? And it's actually quite simple. What we need to do is literally just add an event any damage node. So if we drag off the end and we do event any damage or event. So now the question is, how do we apply damage? And it's actually quite simple. We can drag off the execute pin and we can search apply damage because Unreal has a damage system built into it. In future videos, I'm actually going to expand upon this so you can shoot the limbs in the head and have it do different damage based on whereabouts on the body you shoot. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss that video. But for this, all we need is apply damage, and we know that we're hitting an actor, so we can literally just use that. So hit actor to our damage actor. So we say hit actor. If it's valid, it means we've hit something. Apply the radial impulse, and then we can apply damage. So now we need something that we can actually damage, and we also need a base damage. And like it is, because our damage is controlled from our weapon blueprint, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to drag base damage all the way to our execute or our event, custom event, and we're going to drop it on there. You see it automatically sets it up as base damage. So we hit compile and save. We can go back to our pistol and we can say this weapon is going to cause 100 damage. We don't actually have anything to damage. That's the thing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually import a player that we can use. So by default, there isn't really a character in the VR template. But what we can do is we can go to content and we can go to add and we want to do, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a free asset from the store. So we're going to open up our Epic launcher. We're going to marketplace and in here we want to go to free and then Epic Games content and we want to search mobile and we want to search mobile. And then what we want to do is we want to search for product and we search mannequin and then we hit enter. And this will actually bring up the free UE4 mannequin for mobile. Basically, it's a lower resolution model and lower textures, so it runs better on Quest, especially for VR. This is pretty much what you want to do. So we're going to mannequin, going to go to add to project. It says no compatible user projects found. It's because it was made in an earlier version, so we're just going to do show all projects. And then in here, we're going to look for our project. So mine is VR weapon update. So we have a look through. And because this was made with an earlier version of the engine, we can't actually see our project. So we just want to do show all projects, especially if we're using 4.27. And I'm just going to search for by name, so VR, and I know it's going to be our VR weapon update, so we can select this, and it says asset not compatible with versions 4.27. It is, we just need to change our select version, and we want to change it to just the highest one that's there, so 4.24, and we hit add project. This should literally take seconds, it's not a very big file, but if we minimize and we have a look in our content browser now, we actually have a UE4 mannequin mobile folder, and in the meshes folder in here, we have a character that we can now use. So what I'm going to do is, in here, I'm just going to create a blueprint class. Basically, I'm going to create it as a character so we can actually fire at it. And it just says a character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. We're not going to be setting up any AI, but we are going to use it for now. So character, we're going to call this BP underscore enemy because we're going to end up shooting them. And we're going to open this up. In here, we've got a meshes component in the top left. And all we want to do is literally add our skeletal mesh in here. So we do the drop down, it says SK mannequin mobile. And we're going to drop him down and then rotate him around. So he's facing the direction of the arrow. And then we'll just hit compile, make sure it's all up to date. And what we do now is we can actually drag this guy into our level and rotate him around. And we'll place a couple. That way we can tell that's actually working. So now if we want to shoot them to cause damage, we kind of need to give them some health. So this is pretty easy. We just want to open up our character and go to our event graph. And in here, we're going to create a variable and we're just going to call this health. And it's going to be type float. And we're going to just drag this in, get health. And in this case, we're not going to use any of these events because we actually want a custom one, or we actually want to use the event for damage. So if you remember, we created a function or we used Unreal System for damage. So we can actually search damage and you can see we've got here event any damage. So it's basically going to look or listen to the single shot component, find out what damage actor has been fired, or apply damage. It's going to look for the damaged actor. In this case, when we hit our enemy, it'll be this one or the one in our scene. And then we can call that information and we can fire, we can actually activate it. So from our damage, we want to subtract and we want to So what we want to do is we actually want to subtract our damage from our health. So we're going to drag off from health and we'll do a minus float and plug our damage into there. And then we're going to set our health back to that new updated damage or the value. So if we select our health value, we want to make it a variable public so we can select it from the character in the level. And then if you remember, we set our weapon to do 100 damage. So we're going to do this to 300. So this will actually take 3 shots to kill the character. And then we just do a less than symbol. So float, if it's less than float, we want to destroy the player. So basically, if it's less than 0, his health's gone. We're going to destroy our actor. Now what we can do is we can open up our VR template. We can select our mannequins. And because we made that variable public, we can see here on the right, we can change the health. So let's change this to 500. So this guy will take 5 shots. And then on the right, we'll do 10. So that'd be 1,000. So now we press save and we play. Pick up both weapons. We can still shoot our boxes, but they've got no health, so they won't be destroyed. And you can see that it wasn't actually shooting us because I was shooting the gun in my other hand. So if we look at these guys, the one on the left, we can actually shoot him and take 3, or we can't. They're not actually hitting the line trace. So that's what we've got to fix next. The reason we're not actually hitting our player is because our capsule, so our capsule component, is currently in the way, or it's not registering the correct one. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our capsule component, and we're going to change it from pawn to custom. And all we need to do is change it from our camera. We just want to set ignore or ignore. And then in our mesh, or at least in my template one, what I did is I select the mesh, and then I just changed the collision preset to be physics or physics actor. So they can fall, hit compile and save. And now, once we hit play and we pick up both of our weapons, we can still hit everything. But this time, we can actually shoot our player. So 3 shots, then 5, and then 10. So we can do multiple, and we can just take some pot shots, and then we can go from there. So it's a super simple setup, and it's easy to use. And it's more accurate than using the projectile that comes with the template. So at the beginning, if you remember, I said that we could actually... So I said at the beginning, we can actually convert this to work for multiple shots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can set this up as a system to create a shotgun. So it's actually quite simple. What we need to do is we want to go back to our VR template. Our players are all sorted now, so we don't have to worry about those. But we want to go to our content, our VR template, and our blueprints, where we have our single shot. And we're just going to duplicate this. So literally right click, duplicate, SE, and then we'll call this shotgun. And if we open this up, all we need to do is add some more information. So we need to add 1 value to our input. And the first thing we're going to do is select our custom event. We want to control as much information as possible. So we're going to do a float, and we're going to call this spread. So it'll be bullet spread, and we'll do float just to make it easier. And from this, we want to do radians to degrees. And from here, what we want to do is actually delete this multiply. So we're going to use this in a different way. We then do a random unit vector in cone. So random unit vector in cone. So we want to drag off our return to degrees, and we do random unit vector in cone in degrees. And we're going to right click on our cone direction, and we're going to split those values. And we're going to set our cone direction to 1. So cone direction X to 1. And from here we want to multiply. So what this is doing is basically building a cone for us from our actual center point. So it's just like a bit of a random one. So it takes the return value. We then plug that into our fire distance. So it multiplies by our distance so we can control the range. And then from our get forward vector, we want to do rotation. And from get forward rotation, we'll do rotation from X vector. And then we're going to create a rotate vector. And then we're simply right click, rotate vector, and we want rotate vector. And then we plug the rotation from X vector into B, and then our distance to A, and then we plug the return value from the rotate vector into our add. So if you would try to fire this now, you would still only get 1 trace. The reason for that is our code doesn't loop. We basically need to loop how many times we want those spread. So essentially in a shotgun shell, you pull the trigger, you have different pellets that come out. We want to control how many of those there are. And it's actually pretty easy to do. We just want to do a for loop. So we loop through. So we do for loop. And what this does, it allows us to choose a value for the amount of shots that are in it. And this is essentially our pellet count. So we're going to connect our event to our for loop. Put our loop body into our muzzle location. It'll just do it once, but it'll need it for all of them. And then from here, we can have a first index of 0. So that's going to be the default, which we'll set to 1. And then from there, we want our last index. So this is the number of pellets. And if we're still going for that control, we just want to drag this into our fire component or custom event, and you'll see it updates. So now what we can do is this will loop every time we fire it, but we can go to one of our guns. And in this case, we're going to delete the one on the left. And we're going to duplicate our pistol. and we're going to name it shotgun. So if we open this up now, we still have our single shot component, and we're simply just going to delete this. We'll then search for our shotgun. So we got SC shotgun. We drag this in, and you can see now if we try to connect this to fire, it won't work. It's because the reference is wrong for this. So we're just going to delete that one, drag off our shotgun and search fire. And you see now we've got our updated information. So fire distance, we're going to do, again, let's do 2000. So it's quite far. Base damage, because we've got multiple pellets, we're going to do less. So we're going to set to about 50. And then bullet spread, we can vary on this, but let's try 50. Might be a bit too much to begin with. But for the last index, which I should have really renamed to bullet spread, we're going to do 6. So that'll be 6 pellets. Hit compile, and then we'll update that shotgun value in the custom event now. So just so I don't forget. So the number of pellets. And now if we test it again, so now we can actually drag in our blueprint. So our shotgun acted to the scene, like so. The one on the left is going to be our damage. So we can move over to it, pick it up. And so don't forget, we want to add our muzzle location. If we don't do that, we won't have it. Bullet spread, I think I'm actually going to change this to about 5. Might be a bit too much, 50. So let's do play, pick it up. And now when we pull the trigger, it's actually shooting out, but it's going all over the place. So we need to remove that even more. See, it's really random. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this bullet spread to something even smaller. So 0.5. So now when we fire it, we're getting that spread. So if we go up close, we can shoot them, and it only takes 2 shots. And this guy was 10 shots originally, and then it was 7. So you can play around with how it goes, but you can then have it so it causes whatever type you've got. So now, pretty much, we have a way that we can iteratively change out the type of damage or the fire that we do, at least the type of gun that it is. So it's pretty much a case of duplicating our shotguns and then just duplicating the weapon and changing out that component. And it stops it having to be all in the same one. So you can have different things, do different ones, and you just have the actual component that you attach. So you just need to make sure you attach the component. Then in the gun, you attach the muzzle location to the correct place so it knows whereabouts it is. And then our shotgun type is already referenced, and then just fill out the data and the information in there. So that's pretty much it for this one. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll look at actually adding a like a UMG, so damage UMG, to the player, so we can actually see those icons. So like when you hit him, how much damage it's actually doing. We'll be able to visually see that. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss that video. And if you enjoyed this one and you want to see videos early, please head over to the Patreon. It helps out an absolute ton. And the whole goal is to just try and do more over there as well. So make sure you don't miss the next one. We also have a Discord if you need any help with this. So make sure you head over there and we'll be able to help you out. So until next time, stay safe and I'll see you then.